Cool. I think we're good. Um, Hi. This is the first time I've done a stream ever in my life, so I'm this much nervous. But I'm I've been listening to people read books to me on YouTube for a while, and I decided that was a good idea. And there's some books that I can't find audiobooks for that are just like little fun books, so I'm gonna read one. My goal is to get through, I think, like 40 pages. That's like the first chapter. It's pretty long, but it's a pretty short book. This is what it looks like. The Long, Long Goodbye of the Last Bookstore. It's also Japanese. I mean, it's not in Japanese. It was translated, but it was originally Japanese. And I've been reading a lot of Chinese books recently, so my pronunciation is going to suck, I'll tell you that right now, but I'm trying my best. Okay. Hopefully the sound and everything is working. We did a little test and it was working. So I'm gonna go with it is. And if it isn't, that sucks. Also, ignore the decor. This is my boyfriend's setup, okay? Okay. Ahem. Oh, there's a little quote in the beginning. We tiny people can discern the contents of a letter without even opening the envelope. When we feel the letters, one that has nothing but blunt, plain things written in it, it will feel chilly, cold even. But the more emotional sentiment that was included in a letter, the warmer it will feel in the hand. Excerpt from The Long, Long Story of the Postman. Prologue. Oh, it's got a little picture of a guy. Very cute. Ahem. A heavy snow was falling on the morning that Minami Subaraya learned that the owner of the bookstore where she worked part-time had passed away. I'm the last bookseller in this town, you know, so as long as I'm alive, I'll never close up shop. That had recently become the favorite phrase of the store's owner and manager, Iman Kuomoto, who would recite it while squinting his eyes behind his glasses in a kindly expression. Neither that smile nor his gentle tone of voice had conveyed the feeling of grim resolve that one might expect from such words. His attitude had always been bright and sunny. Manami would smile too and respond with something like, "Well then, you'll have to live a nice long life." 10 years earlier, when Manami was still in middle school, there had been as many as 5 bookstores in town, but books were less popular now. Hold on, sorry. Boyfriend's getting Call of Duty pop-ups. Sorry, Christopher. I just X'd them out. Uh, where was I? 10 years earlier, when Manami was still in middle school, there had been as many as 5 bookstores in town, but books were less popular now, and the rise of e-books and online booksellers had seen each store close one by one. Komoto Books, the last store standing, was a slim 3-story building that occupied a quiet street alongside old cafes and bars near a small movie theater. Though it was in the opposite direction from the prosperous part of town, it was still a short 3-minute walk from the station. Local book lovers flocked there to relax. Even so, Minami was well aware that sales were down year over year, distributions were dwindling, and most of the big releases that the store worked hard to keep in stock for people who wanted to buy them at launch went unsold and had to be returned to the publishers. It was heart-wrenching. But even then, the owner would smile calmly and say in his mellow voice, "Kuomoto Books is this town's last bookstore. If we disappear, I'm sure a lot of people will be sad and won't know what to do. It takes an hour by car to go to the bookstore in the next town, and many older people here find that difficult during the snowy season. So I want to keep this shop going for as long as I live." It had sounded as if he were saying, "Close this shop over my dead body," which had always made Minami feel secretly anxious. I wonder if the boss will remarry. He's young, still in his 40s, slim, a smart dresser, and he's outgoing and kind. I'm sure there are plenty of women who would like him. But maybe he doesn't want to have a family again. Losing loved ones is tragic, especially the way he did. Really, it's not surprising he would think that way after such a depressing incident. Just thinking about Kumamoto Books facing its end alongside the owner's death is lonesome, like an icy frost gripping your heart. Minami had reassured herself that it was still a long way off, and had hoped for a future where the owner could have a new family that would continue to operate Kumoto Books. She'd never imagined that the owner would pass away at the young age of 49, and in such an unnatural accident at that. A college boy working part-time in the bookstore discovered the body. He said that when he'd arrived at the store at 9 in the morning to prepare for opening at 10, the owner had been sprawled out in the children's book section on the second floor with blood flowing from his head. Next to him was an overturned stepladder. Books were scattered all around. He must have stayed late the previous evening to do some organizing. As he was shelving books, the stepladder had toppled out from under him. When he'd grabbed a shelf for stability, all the books had fallen in an avalanche onto his head, and one had hit him in a critical spot. Another blow to the head followed as he'd hit the corner of his cart, and by the time the blood had pooled on the floor, he had already stopped breathing. The part-timer had called an ambulance in a panic, but it was already too late, and the police had deemed his death an unfortunate accident. Mr. Kumoto had no living relatives. With the loss of its sole proprietor, the bookstore would have to close. Kumoto Books is closing? Where are we supposed to buy books now? And it was so convenient, too, close to the station, and with such a good collection. The owner was so kind and knowledgeable. What an awful way to go out, especially because he was the third generation in his family to run the place. He kept giving his all for this town, even after he lost his wife and child. That family had the worst luck. Can't they keep it open as something or other books? It just won't be the same here without it. Many people expressed similar sentiments to Minami and the other staff at the bookstore, but no eccentric benefactor materialized to purchase the failing business and keep the store running. Thus, Kumoto Books, which had operated for 69 years straight, was slated to close up shop on the last day of March, 2 months after the death of Imon Komoto. The shop had been shuttered since the accident, but before it closed for good, it would reopen for just 1 week to show appreciation for its customers and clear out the inventory. Minami was busy with the preparations. She hadn't felt like doing anything for about a month after the owner passed away, and had spent every day idling at home. Even crying was beyond her. The reality that the store owner was gone, and that Kumoto Books was going to disappear, still felt far away. Minami had dulled her feelings to protect herself from heartache. She'd spent all day in bed with her eyes closed. Like many book lovers, Minami was nearsighted and couldn't even see as far as her outstretched hands without her glasses. Nevertheless, she had stumbled around her apartment without putting them on, and groped her way to the refrigerator to retrieve ham, cheese, and other foods that didn't require any preparation, which she begrudgingly ate out of obligation, if not hunger. She'd spent several days like that. Gradually, she'd managed to convince herself to get up and start moving, and now she was furiously working to prepare for the final week of business and stave off her depressing thoughts. There were 5 part-timers at the store, Minami, 2 high schoolers, 1 college student, and 1 housewife. Minami had been working part-time at Kumoto Books for the last 7 years, since her second year of high school. She had been there the longest of any of her coworkers, so they were relying on her to see things through. Plus, since she wasn't studying or taking care of a family like the others, she could spend all her time preparing for the shop's last hurrah. That's how she ended up at the store alone again, finishing up some small details. Once she finished tidying up the comics corner of the 3rd floor, she headed down the stairs. From the children's section on the 2nd floor, she heard a voice. Someone was speaking, even though she had already drawn the shutters down and should have been the only person in the store. Maybe one of the part-timers came back for something? From her position midway down the stairs, Minami lifted her glasses up just a little bit and strained to scan the 2nd floor. As she gazed around the room, she saw an unfamiliar young man standing in front of some shelves. Is that a high schooler? The intruder had a slight build and wore a navy blue duffel coat with a white scarf wrapped around his neck. Minami started to approach the trespasser, ready to scold him for entering the store without permission, when she heard his somewhat high-pitched, boyish voice again. Is that so? It's so tragic that happened. I understand. Who is he talking to? But no matter what angle she held her glasses at, the only person Minami could see was the young man in the duffel coat. All right, I'm sorry, Princess Yonaga. This isn't cheating, I promise. After all, you insisted on coming along no matter what when I told you to stay home. Minami was starting to feel uneasy. Who was the boy talking to? You're right. 10 days is too long to be apart. I feel the same way. Yes, I love you. No, I'm not lying. You're the only one for me. So please just quiet down a little. I swear 1,000,000 times to the god of books I'm not cheating on you. The boy was standing exactly where the store owner had collapsed and died. When Minami realized that, she felt all the hair on the back of her neck stand up and her limbs stiffen. Sorry for the interruption. My girlfriend is very cute, but she's the jealous type. Let's see, then. I'll ask again. Who killed Imon? Her shoulders hitched slightly in surprise, as if someone had run a cold hand across her spine. Unable to endure the creeping fear that hit her all at once, she shouted angrily, What are you doing over there? The boy turned around. His large glasses gave him an innocent look. Mouth slightly agape, he stared back at Minami with big round eyes. As he moved, his black hair bounced softly. He seemed like a totally unremarkable schoolboy. In fact, his appearance was so ordinary that Minami eased up. Her fear faded, and she approached him without hesitation. Who were you talking to just now? You said something about the boss, didn't you? What's the meaning of this? She asked, scowling. The boy blinked rapidly behind his glasses and put both hands up, either to stop her or to gesture in surrender. I'm sorry. I called out from the back door downstairs, but no one answered, so I let myself in. My name is Masubu Inoki. I came here after I received a notice from a lawyer. Young Masubu didn't sound as though he was from the area. He spoke like someone you'd see on TV, without an accent of any sort. Did this kid come from another city? And what's this about a lawyer? What he told her next only strengthened Minami's suspicion of him. Apparently there was something written about me in the will that Mr. Iman left with his lawyer before he died. In the event that he passed away, I'm supposed to be entrusted with all the books in here. God, I wish that were me. He continued with a friendly, unguarded smile on his face. I've just started spring break, you see. From tomorrow on, I'll be working with you for a little while. Let's see, you're Minami Subaraya, yet, right? The one who's been working here the longest out of all the part-timers, and the most reliable lady around. Wow, how reassuring. I'm used to taking care of books, but this will be my first time working in a bookstore, so I'm sure I'll be depending on you. Book 1. The Field Guide of Extinct Animals was waiting. And there's a little girl. Ignore my nails. I work on cars. They're disgusting. I know. Hold on. Chai. Come on in. Starting today, we're having our grand store closing. We've got all sorts of activities. You can take commemorative photographs with your favorite books, make a sign to display, and more. Please come join us. The young man in glasses, wearing a white shirt and a blue apron with the store's name printed on it, was shouting clearly and energetically at passers-by. Minami watched with a stern look in her eye. Hello, everyone. I'm Masubu Inoki. I'll be here at Kumoto Books helping out until the store closes. It's just a short while, but I look forward to working with you. It was the day after Minami had met him. None of the other part-timers had been able to hide their bewilderment at the small boy greeting them with a smile either. Starting in April, he would be in his second year of high school. He had gone out of his way to come from his home in Tokyo to this small town in Tohoku. The owner of the store had written in his will that upon his death all the volumes of Kumoto books were to be entrusted to Masubu Inoki. Minami had heard that from both Masubu and a lawyer who had visited the shop the day before. He didn't bequeath the books, he entrusted them. What does that mean? As long as it was within a set window of time, the store could return books stocked by a distributor. New releases would typically be sent back for resale, so Minami had figured the same would happen with most of the leftover books. So what was the boss thinking, leaving that up to the discretion of a high school boy? In any case, if this boy had the right to every book in the store, that meant they couldn't sell anything without his permission. But where did that leave the closing sale? All the staff had been concerned, but Masubu had bowed and spoken to them with a sincere smile. Ah, the books here belong to the shop until the very end, so don't worry. We'll hold a grand store closing as planned. Everything will be fine, and I'll be here to help out. His smile betrayed not a trace of ill will. For the time being, all the part-timers besides Manabi seemed to be put at ease. But what kind of relationship did you think Inoki had with Amon anyway? Were they related? I heard that the boss's family all died. He's not supposed to have any relatives left. Maybe he had a secret love child. Now that you mention it, he does wear glasses. There's a resemblance. Manami scolded the part-timers. They just wear similar-looking big glasses, that's all. There's no way the boss would have a secret kid. Since coming back to work at the bookshop, Minami would often find herself on edge, even at the best of times. When she looked at Masubu's friendly face, she couldn't help but feel a sting of irritation and suspicion in her chest. She couldn't understand why the boss had entrusted all the books in the shop to Masubu, who was still just a high schooler. It frustrated her. She had been working there the longest and had been his most reliable employee. Why'd he give everything to this kid? He's not even a local. He's from Tokyo. She glumly repeated this to herself like a refrain. Hearing him talk about his relationship with Amon only made her more annoyed. I happened to make his acquaintance last autumn when he came to Tokyo on business. I'm a book lover too, so we hit it off, and that's all there is to it. Last autumn? They'd only known each other for half a year. I've been working here for 7. Moreover, on the first day they had met, he had been muttering to himself in front of the bookshelf where Amon had died. That had been bothering her ever since, and had sent her deeper into uncertainty. Who killed Amon? That was what he'd asked back then. When Manami had asked him what he meant by it, he'd played dumb. Are you sure I said that? You definitely did. I heard you myself. When Manami had pressed in closer, the boy's eyes had widened, and he'd let out a little shriek. I'm not cheating, Princess Yonaga. My heart can't take it when you suddenly start cursing me, so cut it out, please. Yes, of course it's a misunderstanding. I love you, so quit with the curses. Masubu got flustered without warning and started talking to himself again. Manami stared at him dumbfounded while he apologized. Sorry, my girlfriend gets super jealous whenever I even talk to or approach another girl, so do you think you could back off a little? Your girlfriend? Where is she then? You've been talking to yourself this whole time. Frankly, you seem kinda crazy. Oh, that's rude. When she asked about this girlfriend, his eyes darted around guiltily behind his glasses. I try my best not to talk to her in front of other people, but it just sort of happened. The thing is, I can talk to books. He was blurting out something that didn't make any sense again. Are you playing some kind of prank? No, of course not. It's true. For whatever reason, I've always been able to hear the voices of books, and when I talk to them, they answer me willingly. When I mention my girlfriend, I'm talking about her. From the pocket of his duffel coat, he excitedly pulled out a thin paperback book with a blue cover. Princess Yonaga and Ear Man. That's a novel by Engo Sakaguchi. If I remember correctly, it's the story of a sculptor who is tormented by a beautiful and devilish girl who loves to watch people die. That's right, Princess Yonaga is the name of that malicious young lady. Is this like how boys who are fans of light novels and manga will often call their favorite heroine their wife? But he says he's actually conversing with this princess. Either he's a serious otaku or puberty is making him crazy. Princess Yonaga is greeting you too, Miss Subaraya. She's saying, if you put your face close to Masubu's or touch him or wink at him, I'll curse you. Sorry, but it would help me out if you'd be careful. There's no way I'm going to wink at you. Was he deliberately trying to change the subject from what happened to the shop owner to make her angry? She was suspicious, then realized something and jumped with alarm. Did you just call me Subaraya? How do you know my name? And earlier, you know I was the most senior employee here. Yeah, you said that I Yeah, you said that I had been working here the longest and that I seemed to be the most reliable, didn't you? Who did you hear that from? When she asked this question, he looked at her intently with big clear eyes from behind his transparent lenses and smiled as he answered. The books told me. How ridiculous. Despite her misgivings, for a moment Manami almost deluded herself into believing Masubu could really hear the voices of books. But when she gave it some more thought, she realized he must have seen her personnel file beforehand. Her photograph would have even been attached to her resume. Surely that's how he had known who she was. There was no way he could have conversed with the books. If Masubu believed that he could, he was either loopy from hormones or suffering from delusions of grandeur. Who killed him on? When he'd said that, he'd sounded as if he'd been speaking to someone from a reality of his own creation. As Manami helped a steady stream of customers, she occasionally shot a pointed glance in his direction. He was working hard, calling out to customers and handling them well. Chiding herself to worry about doing her own job before saying anything about him, she tried to channel her annoyance into her work. Positive attitude aside, Masubu had said he was used to handling books, but his manner was so delicate it was astonishing. He touched them softly, as if he were cradling a precious treasure, and slipped on their paper covers gently, as if caressing them. And when he looked at a book, it was with eyes as affectionate as when you gaze at a dear friend. My apologies. Where was I? Whenever a customer picked up a book or went to make a purchase, his lips curled into a contented smile. The way he was acting made her recall Amon, the owner. He, too, would look genuinely happy whenever someone purchased a book. He would smile softly as he saw the volume off, as if he were silently indicating he was glad for it. But Amon and Masubu are different people, and there's absolutely no way he's the boss's secret kid. Looks like we should have prepared a bit more colored paper for the customers to make signs, huh? I'll get right on that. Masubu wore a more carefree expression than Iman ever had. As he was cutting the colorful poster board into different shapes, Masubu asked, You got the idea to have customers make and display these pop signs from that book, right? A funeral for Kenoyama Books. He sounded as if he were enjoying himself. A bestseller depicting the only bookstore in a small snowy village in the last days before its closing. People with a connection to the shop come to visit one after another, and the pictures they take with their favorite books are displayed throughout the shop with pride and joy, like multicolored flags. That scene was incredibly striking in both the novel and the movie. The author, Koichi Tamagami, is apparently from this town. He held a book signing at Kumamoto Books. Mr. Tamagami was, before his debut, he was a regular here, and I heard he was close friends with Amon, so... With a smash hit movie on his hands, the best-selling author had held a book signing in this small local bookstore. The news had excited the townspeople, and on the day of the signing, a long line had stretched out of the building. Everyone had been clutching a copy of A Funeral for Kanayama Books to their chests, and Iman had been smiling effusively as he chatted with the crowd. Undoubtedly, it had been Kumamoto Books' finest hour. The internet wasn't as widespread as it is now. There were no smartphones, and there were fewer ways to amuse oneself alone, so for many people, reading books was a pleasure, a blessing, even a reason to live. The heavy weight of a finely bound hardcover in the hand, the feel of crisp new pages that threatened to slice one's fingers, they were enough to make the heart flutter with anticipation. That was nearly 20 years ago. At the time, Manami hadn't even started kindergarten yet, but she remembered standing in the long line with her mother and getting the author to sign the inside cover of their book. It had gotten lost before she knew it, though. Do you think Mr. Tamagami will come to our grand store closing? He's supposed to come, right? Well, if he does, it'll be amazing publicity. Just imagine, an author who wrote a bestseller about the final days of his village's only bookshop, and he's coming to the grand send-off of the last bookstore in this town, Masubu babbled. His springy black hair bounced and bobbed as he spoke. I wonder. I did contact him, but he's a busy man. Though Koichi Tamagami's popularity had declined since his heyday, he still periodically published new works. Since he had held a signing at Kumamoto Books only once and declined all further invitations, even for giving lectures at the local community center, he probably wasn't coming. At one point, when sales had started to decline, someone had suggested asking him to return for another book signing, but Amon had narrowed his eyes behind his glasses and smiled sadly as he answered, Mr. Tamagami might be difficult to get a hold of. In the days when Mr. Tamagami was living in town, he and Amon had been close enough friends that he would sometimes spend all night chattering with him in the bookstore's office. But that closeness must have faded after Mr. Tamagami had gotten famous and moved to Tokyo. An old part-timer who had quit the year before had mentioned it to Manami. When Amon's baby was born, a congratulatory present arrived from Mr. Tamagami, and Amon was overjoyed. But when he called him up to say thank you and asked him to come back and visit Kumoto Books sometime, he apparently turned him down. Amon was really sad about it. Amon's not the type to wear his troubles on his sleeve, but I remember it well. First because he seemed really unhappy, and second because he actually complained about it, which was something he rarely ever did. He'd griped about Mr. Tamagami being cold-hearted, even though the two of them had been such good friends. They'd found time to hang out in the office together, even when Amon had been busy. But I guess it was inevitable. People who move away always forget where they came from. But the people who stay always remember the ones who left, gossiping as if they'd seen them just yesterday. Ouch. Right. Huh, look at that customer. Masubu, whose hands had been practically flying at the register as they had been chatting, stopped abruptly. He stared at the door, concerned about something. Wide and round behind his lenses, his eyes were wavering as they followed the movements of one particular customer, past the register, down an aisle, and beyond. He was holding his breath and straining to hear something. Only his eyes moved, swaying like a single leaf floating on the water's surface. Manami, is that guy a regular customer? I don't know him, but is that so? Masubu seemed really worried about him for some reason, so Manami strained to get a look. He was an old man with white hair and a slightly bent back. Was he in his mid-70s, maybe? Deep wrinkles were carved in sharp relief on his face, and his eyes were sunken. He seemed impatient for some reason. Manami could sense his irritation by the look in his eye and the pace of his gait, and it caused her to shudder. Anyone who works at a bookstore for a long time will be able to identify shoplifters. Recently, it hadn't been just young kids. Older people who were struggling to make ends meet had been turning to shoplifting too. Looking carefully at the coat the man was wearing, she could see that the hem and sleeves were starting to fray with age. Maybe... Masubu was still silently lost in thought. Leaving him behind, Manami began casually following the man. Without so much as glancing at the books and magazines on the first floor, the man began to climb the central staircase that led to the children's section on the second story. Kumoto Books had always put effort into stocking children's books, and their selection on the second floor rivaled even the collections of their large competitors, something Manami was privately proud of. However, Amon had also died there. Some of the visiting customers were interested in seeing the scene of the accident, and they would take it upon themselves to climb to the second floor, then ask Manami and the other workers gruesome questions like, about where did the owner pass away? Ew. Manami had told the other part-timers to politely decline to answer such inquiries, so this man should not have known exactly where on the second floor Mon had died. Despite that, he had beelined for the spot and stopped there. He's not a shoplifter? Manami's chest tightened. Her suspicion toward the old man transformed into something much darker and heavier. Why did he stop right there? That's where the boss collapsed. When she had arrived at the shop after the accident, his body had already been removed and the police had been investigating the scene, but Amon's bloodstain had still remained. The man was now squinting at the top of the bookshelf, twisting his face as he looked up. With seeming difficulty and pain, he stretched his neck out and stared intensely. His wrinkled face warped steadily with emotion, and he grew terribly distressed. He looked tense enough to shout something at any second. The man was staring at the shelf that held the children's dictionaries and illustrated reference books, the very ones that had fallen on Amon's head and taken his life. Manami's neck stiffened, and a cold sweat broke out on her palms. Her heart was pounding fast. The man stood on tiptoe and reached a hand out toward the shelf. Manami gasped when she saw the wounds that ran from his palm down to his wrist. There are so many cuts. It's like he was clawed or bitten. His wounded hand was heading for the top shelf. The man was of about average height for his age, maybe 165 or 166 centimeters. His back was slightly bent, but with effort he stretched up on tiptoe to grasp an illustrated reference book on the top shelf. Though it was a book for children, it was quite heavy and thick. He's standing so awkwardly that it could slip out of his hand and hit his head while he's trying to grab it. Then it'll be the boss's accident all over again. An image of an avalanche of books crashing down on the man flashed through Manami's mind, and her whole body tensed up. "Watch out! Sir, if there's a book you need, I'll get it for you." She called out to him as politely as possible, taking care not to let her suspicion show on her face. The man's scarred hand trembled, and he turned to face her. Face still racked with tension, he glared at her with sunken eyes. The intensity of his world-weary gaze made her flinch. Manami had dealt with many elderly customers. Occasionally one would start shouting all of a sudden, as if a switch had been flipped, so Manami was on guard now. But she smiled with all her might and asked, "Which book shall I get down?" The man's shoulders hitched again in surprise, and his dry, cracked lips opened slightly before snapping shut again. He pulled his injured hand into the sleeve of his coat as if to hide it, his expression hesitant and uneasy, until finally speaking in a hoarse, quiet voice. "It's not here." I don't understand. He looked like he was reaching out desperately to take a book, though. Is the title he wants not here? What sort of book might it be? I'll search for it." When she asked that, the man's strained, frightened expression collapsed into a look of sorrow. With a frown pulling down the corners of his mouth, he mumbled hopelessly, "No, it's fine. You won't find it." "But, sir—" She was starting to feel dejected, without so much as a guess as to what the man could possibly be searching for. "I'm sure we have that book here in the store." Suddenly someone spoke from behind her. She turned around in surprise to find Masubu bounding over, his eyes sparkling brightly behind his glasses, and his hair fluttering softly as he moved. "Hang on, what did he just say? He can't possibly know the title from our exchange just now." The customer's eyes were also wide open. Still beaming, Masubu reassured him. "I'll bring it over to you in a moment, so if you would be so kind, please wait here for a bit." After announcing that clearly, he turned his luminous eyes toward Manami. "Miss Tsuburaya, would you help me, please?" She bowed to the customer as Masubu started walking, then took off after him. "Hang on, where are you going? What do you mean, help you?" "Well, I guess I mean that I want your help finding the book the customer wants. I got a hint, but I'm not quite sure what we're looking for." "What? You don't even know where it is, but you told him you'd bring it to him? You're unbelievable." Feeling as if she might start shouting at any moment, Manami desperately tried to keep her tone in check. "I knew this kid was a weird one. He can't be trusted." "You turn around right now and go apologize," she insisted. "Wait a minute, please. I can't possibly do it on my own, but if you work with me, I have a feeling we can find the book, Miss Tsuburaya." She had no idea why he was so confident. With a stern expression, she asked, "What was the hint?" His face softened with relief. "First, it's something big, sharp, and scary." "Huh?" Manami was stunned. Masubu continued in a flowing tone of voice. "A story of long, long, long ago." "Wait a second. It's not here anymore." "Not here?" "No, apparently it's in the tea room." "Tea room? Where is that?" "There's an ocean and bird bones, and it's in a blue mausoleum." Manami scowled with her head in her hands, when suddenly she had a realization. The ocean and bird bones? Could it be? Masubu grinned. "Ah, you've got it?" She didn't answer. She simply walked off, her lips still pursed. I thought for sure he was joking around. But bird bones? She headed straight down an aisle on the second floor, all the way to an office at the other end, and she opened the door. The gray room behind it was about 11 meters square and enclosed by undressed concrete walls. It contained a sofa, a side table, an office desk, and a bookshelf. On the shelf sat miscellaneous books of various sizes and genres. A single painting of about A4 size hung on the wall across from the bookshelf. It depicted huge white bird bones that dominated an ocean beach landscape. Musubu must have been entering the office for the first time, because when he saw the painting, he mumbled, "So this is where the ocean and bird bones are." Then he asked Minami, "All right, and the tea room?" The boss often used to have tea in here, and everyone jokingly called it the Kumodo Cafe, so... The second floor office was like the boss's second home, and there he would thoughtfully serve all sorts of drinks to suit his guests' taste, from black tea and coffee to green and herbal tea. When Minami had first visited the room in middle school, even she'd been served sweet tea by Amon, which she'd drunk with tearful gratitude. Her throat tightened and her fingers shook a little, even now. She felt as though she might glimpse a phantom of a man smiling at her from the other side of the steam rising from her cup. Thankfully, Musubu didn't notice her trembling, as he was examining the wall instead. "I see. So this must be the Blue Mausoleum, huh?" Below the painting was a blue storage chest. He got on his knees, opened it, and dug through the contents. He set many old beat-up books on the floor beside him before hauling one out with both hands, a sparkle in his eyes. "Got it." Manami had been lost in memories of the past, but when she saw Musubu holding up a book like a piece of treasure, she came back to herself. "Hang on, Inoki. That's... I'm going to go give it to the customer. Wait, Inoki!" By the time she called out to stop him, he had rushed out of the office, book in hand. She chased after him in a panic. "What do I do? If Inoki gives him a book like that, the customer's probably going to think he's making fun of him and get mad." Up ahead of her, the anxious Manami could see Musubu handing over the volume to the elderly man with a broad grin, and she could hear his cheerful voice. "My apologies for the wait. I believe this is what you were looking for, sir." He was holding an illustrated reference book for children. On the cover of the large format book was the title, "The Field Guide of Extinct Animals," accompanied by images of animals like dinosaurs, a Tasmanian tiger, and a dodo bird. Something big, sharp, and scary. A story of long, long, long ago. Not here anymore. Sure enough, the book did match the hints Masubu had mentioned. But the reference book in his hands had a stained cover with faded print, and the pages were warped and wavy. A piece of paper with the word "sample" written on it in red was stuck to the cover, which had been laminated with a clear film. It was Kumodo Books' policy to put worn and damaged books on the shelf as display samples. The idea was to leave out some titles that were all right to soil, especially in the children's corner, where kids often dirtied them. The volume Masubu had fished from the blue storage box seemed to have been one such title, but it was quite old and badly damaged all over. It was clear at a glance that it had reached the end of its lifetime, even as a display book. There was no way they could sell such a worn-out, unfit copy to a customer. She felt a rush of perspiration as she interjected from beside Masubu. "I'm so sorry, sir. He's new. He only joined our staff the day before yesterday." She began apologizing. The man, who had been wearing a pained look until this moment, suddenly opened his sunken eyes wide and stared at the reference book with the sample sticker as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His lips, arms, and shoulders were all trembling. His expression was not one of anger or disappointment, but rather one filled with deep emotion. Manami fell silent. My tea's getting a bit cold. Tragic. Where was I? A faint pool of tears even welled up in his wrinkle-bound eyes. His slim, bony, scarred-up hand emerged slowly from the sleeve of his coat, and he extended it to accept the field guide from Masubu. As he took the hefty tome, the man's hands jerked downward, and his eyes filled further with tears, as if even the weight itself had an emotional impact. And then he spoke in a tear-choked voice. "That's right. I was looking for this. I was certain it had been thrown away long ago, but it was still here." The man embraced the book lovingly with hands covered in scars and wrinkles. As Manami watched, the muscles in Masubu's face relaxed, as though a beloved old friend were stroking him like a precious object. "It's been a long time. Have you been well? You've really grown." It was almost as if he could hear those words being said aloud. Behind his glasses, his big eyes narrowed joyfully, and his mouth, which still retained some of its childlike innocence, spread into a broad smile. When the man opened the cover carefully with trembling fingers, he found an image of a Tyrannosaurus, accompanied by some small writing. Looking down at the illustrations, the man's face creased again as he bit his lip and blinked some tears away. Manami had absolutely no idea what was going on. But in the 7 years she'd worked part-time at Komodo Books, she had never seen a customer so happy to receive a title she'd located for them, had never seen anyone so joyous. To this man, that stained, worn out field guide was the most important book in the world. As he blinked and sniffled over and over, he turned the pages with his scarred hands. That's right, I wanted to read this book. I wanted to see it again, he muttered. Then he told them an old story involving the book. The old man's name was Michijiru Furukawa, and he was a veterinarian in a neighboring town. He had received the injuries on his hands from being scratched and bitten by his patients during treatment. Manami was beginning to grasp the situation. The fraying on his coat, too, was thanks to scratches from the cats he was caring for in his own home. His wife had cautioned him that it looked unbecoming, but he was inclined to be frugal, so he had told her he couldn't throw away something he could still wear. When Michijiru was still a child, a woman named Natsu Komodo, the founder of Komodo Books, had been the proprietor here. Natsu had lost her husband in the war and had started a bookstore in this town while raising her young child. At the time, the splendid three-story bookstore had been the pride of the town. From the very first day it opened, everyone had gone there, and it was crowded with people. They said that if you went to Komodo Books, you could find any sort of book you were looking for. My family was poor, you see. There were a lot of us children, and we could never get our parents to buy us luxury items like books. That's why on the way home from school, I would walk 1 hour to Komodo Books and stand here reading. It was my greatest joy as a child. On one of those trips, he had encountered the Field Guide of Extinct Animals. The cover full of illustrations of animals he had never seen before had drawn him in at first glance, and he had read it eagerly from cover to cover. He'd been thrilled by the realistically painted Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Dodo, and Tasmanian tiger, and he never tired of gazing at them. Once he knew about this reference book, going to Komodo Books became that much more fun. Whether he was sitting in class at school or helping out at home, he thought only of wanting to get back there and read more of it. The reference book was staggeringly expensive and would have been absolutely out of reach for a family that would have struggled to pay for an ordinary book. Michijiro didn't even get any spending money. But I was plenty satisfied simply knowing that it would be there, like a great treasure, if I just went to Komodo Books. Even on days when it was drizzling rain, or when a cold wind was blowing, or when the snow had piled up deep enough to bury his ankles, he still wanted to enjoy the book, so he would hurry down the road to Komodo Books with red cheeks. Ah, I want to read it right now. I want to read. And after he would arrive at the usual place and pick up the reference book to begin turning its pages, it was all bliss. The Tasmanian tiger's fangs were incredibly sharp and strong. Both the Triceratops and the Tyrannosaurus walked the earth in the distant past, and they left behind gigantic footprints in the ground. Although the dodo had wings, for some reason it just tottered around and couldn't fly. To Michijiro, it seemed as if the creatures might leap out of the open pages at any second. It was fun and exciting. But one day he realized one of the women working in the shop was watching him. She was tall and thin and wore glasses, with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail on the back of her head. She always stood up perfectly straight, as if she had a ruler down her back, and her expression was always so stern, as if she was angry, so Michijuru was afraid of her. That woman was staring right at him. She must be upset because I've just been standing here reading every day. Whenever she drew near, his heart pounded, because he knew that one day she would throw him out and tell him to never come back again, that if he wanted the book, he had to bring money to buy it. He didn't know what he would do if that should happen. Just thinking about it made his chest tighten and made him feel lonely. Many children besides Michijuru stood around reading in the children's section, but their parents bought them books when they came to meet them. Michijuru was probably the only one who had never bought a book, and the sense of inferiority he felt led him to close the reference book and sneak off down the stairs whenever he caught sight of that scary female employee. Whenever that happened, he would feel miserable and want to cry. Sometimes an employee in a student uniform would come over to play with the kids in the children's corner. He was really good at reading aloud and was very popular with the children. Whenever he appeared, they would all shout for his attention. Ah, it's Mr. Kanesada. Mr. Kanesada, read this book. The children would put books in his hands, and Mr. Kanesada would start reading, skillfully changing his voice to play all the characters, and even the children who were reading on their own would come over to listen. These were the only times when Michijuru would also stop turning his pages and stealthily incline his ear. The young man in the school uniform was Kanesada Kuomoto, the son of the owner. One time when Michijuru had been the only one in the children's section, Kanesada had spoken to him genially. Hey, is that interesting? He nodded stiffly. Great. Well, take your time with it. He smiled, then left him alone and at ease. Thus, whenever Kanesada was there, Michijuru felt relieved. Whenever the scary lady was there, however, he felt glum. That lady was Kanesada's mother, Natsu, the founder of the store, you know. The reason why he knew that, he told them, his eyes narrowing with nostalgia as he spoke, was because of what had happened after that, the extremely shocking incident that had followed. The day that it happened, he'd walked an hour on the way home from school as usual and arrived at Kumoto Books. Other kids were standing around reading in the children's book corner, and he didn't see any staff nearby. Thank goodness. Relieved, Michijuru went over to the usual bookcase and leaned down to pull the Field Guide of Extinct Animals off the lowest shelf. But his beloved field guide was nowhere to be found. Huh? Did someone buy it? His mind went blank. It was a new publication with an outrageous price tag. The library at his school definitely didn't have it. If someone had purchased the reference book, he would no longer be able to read it at all. His heart was pounding, and he broke out in a cold sweat. Could it really have been purchased? Maybe it got put in a different spot by mistake. Holding his breath, he swept his gaze steadily over the bookcase from top to bottom, then felt another wave of despair creep over him. It had been moved to the very top shelf, you see. It was tall enough that it would have been difficult for even an adult to fetch without using a stepladder. For a kid, that was out of the question. He looked up at his beloved book, which now seemed like a phantom flower blooming at the summit of a mountain, impossible to touch or smell. He was convinced it had been moved to such a high place so that he couldn't access it any more, since he had been coming in every day to stand around and read. With that thought, his eyes grew hot with emotion, and his chest felt as if it would split open with sorrow. He had no money, and he knew he was in the wrong for only ever reading without buying, so he couldn't say anything to the staff. When he thought about not being able to read the book, Michijuru felt as if all the fun and joy in his daily existence had been ripped out by the roots, as if a gaping dark hole had suddenly opened up under him. He was lonesome and heartbroken and miserable, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. Tears flooded his eyes, and then someone offered him a book from off to the side. You must be looking for this. Reflected in his blurry field of vision was the reference book he was sure he had lost. A piece of paper with the word sample in red letters was affixed to the cover. The person holding it out to him was the scary lady with the stern gaze. This copy is for trial reading, so you can read it as much as you like. The woman's face was the same as always, strict and tense. Her voice was stiff too. But when Michijuru was too bewildered to take the book, she pressed it into his arms. Here you go. When you grow up, come back and buy lots of books, okay? With that, she stood up straight and walked away. Holding the sample book in his hands, Michijuru felt like crying again, this time for a completely different reason. That's when I realized Natsu was the owner. It also became clear to me that even though she always stood there with a severe look on her face, she was actually watching to make sure all the children in her shop were okay. I'm certain she was concerned about me as well. Natsu had lost her husband in the war. During wartime, all amusements had been prohibited. It had been a dark and painful era when you couldn't even read a book. Natsu, who had wanted nothing more than to read, had decided to open her own bookstore once things were peaceful. A place where she would be surrounded by so many books that a lifetime wouldn't be enough to read them all. A place the people of her town would get excited to visit because it would have any and every kind of book they might want to read. A place where they could encounter splendid new books, too. That was the kind of store she'd want to build. Still, young Michijuru didn't fully understand all the details about Natsu he overheard from the adults who visited Kumoto Books. But at the same time, he no longer thought of her as the scary shop lady. The eyes behind her glasses now looked very earnest, sincere, and beautiful. Once he'd asked Natsu what her favorite book was, and she'd informed him that it was the stories her deceased husband had told to her during wartime. Her husband had improvised a tale every night for his wife, who was desperate to read something. To Natsu, her husband, Soratsugu, was a special book all her own. She told Michijuru that Kanesada had gotten his skill at reading aloud from Soratsugu. Her story touched him. He thought this reference book, with sample written on it in big red letters, was his own special and precious book. When Michijuru advanced to his third year of middle school, he was old enough to get a job, so he wasn't able to visit Kumoto Books as frequently. Nevertheless, he kept going until he graduated from middle school. Every time he visited, he would take the Field Guide of Extinct Animals in his hands and flip through its pages. It was his special book, after all, the one guaranteed to make him happy. Some day I'm going to come buy this book from here. I'm going to hand over my money to Miss Natsu, then tell her to please give me this book. This was what he vowed to himself as he headed to Tokyo to find a job at age 15, but daily life in the printing factory where he was first employed proved harsh. He worked overtime on top of overtime, with no breaks, and sent almost his entire paycheck back to his family as soon as he got it, with little for himself. Ultimately, his body was broken after 5 years of work, and the company fired him. My dreams and hopes had all been crushed. I came back to this town feeling miserable, and when I visited Kumoto Books for the first time in 5 years, I felt even worse. I was supposed to save up my money and buy lots of books to pay back the kindness I had received, but Miss Natsu had already passed away. On top of that, all I had done was accumulate debt without knowing when I would be able to work again. My future was bleak. I thought I would be better off dying, too, like the extinct animals in the reference book. I felt then that seeing the book might be some comfort. A broken man, Michijuru had staggered through the shop and climbed the stairs up to the children's book corner, thinking that surely the book wouldn't be there any more. It was. As he spoke that one phrase packed with 1,000 emotions, Michijuru's voice wavered, and his eyes watered. It had gotten quite damaged since I had last read it 5 years earlier, and there were even some pages that were torn on the edges. Even so, to see that my precious field guide was still where I left it was, well, it set me trembling. The heat had risen steadily through his throat and eyes, and he'd fought back the rising tears again and again. When he'd found the reference book again, he'd picked it up, blinking repeatedly and shaking slightly. He turned the pages. Recalling the happy boyhood days he'd spent with the book, he turned and turned. It was almost as if I could hear the book encouraging me, telling me I wasn't extinct just yet. As if it was saying there was still work I could do, that I was just getting started, that I could still give it my all and start anew. Michijuru's eyes were red, and his voice was filled with passion. Beside him, Masubu listened with an expression of joy and satisfaction. Every so often he nodded slightly, as if he was listening to the whisperings of the field guide that Michijuru was holding with such care. You really did your best. How admirable. You never gave up, did you? I remember you. Minami hurried to shake the thought off, chiding herself that it was impossible. There's no way he can actually hear the voices of books. Even at a time like this, the book can't possibly be speaking. She was mad at herself for even entertaining the idea. But there was no doubt that the field guide of extinct animals had given Michijuru courage. After he saw the book again, he began working and attending night school and went on to university to become a veterinarian. Now his children were grown, and he was still running his small clinic by himself. Neither my son nor my daughter became vets, so the clinic I started will end with me. I'll really be an extinct animal after all. I'll close up shop after my body becomes too weak to work. I've really been feeling my age lately, but I'm glad that I encountered this field guide and that I was able to become who I am today. I've got nothing but appreciation for Kumamoto books. It's hard to believe that not only Kanesada in the second generation, but the third generation owner Iman died so young too. He said that as his life got busy, he'd stopped going out of his way to visit Kumamoto books from the next town over. When he learned that Iman had died and the store would be closing, he'd felt the same astonishment he'd had as a child when the field guide wasn't in its usual place. He'd wondered if perhaps the sample copy was still there. A copy of the Field Guide of Extinct Animals he'd purchased was already on his bookshelf at home, but that particular display copy was full of happy memories from his childhood. That special book had encouraged him as a young man and helped him to move ahead with his life. Before Kumamoto Books disappeared, he'd wanted more than anything to find out whether the sample copy was still around. With that single burning desire, Michijuru had stepped foot into the bookstore he fondly remembered for the first time in more than 30 years. He'd headed straight for the second story and had been overwhelmed with emotions when he saw that the children's reading corner was still there, same as ever. The Field Guide of Extinct Animals hadn't been with the other display books or on the shelf, and he'd felt sadness spread over him as he thought, of course not. He realized that, now that he was an adult, he could probably reach the top shelf, and he had extended a hand towards it. This was the peculiar movement Minami had witnessed from Michijuru. Masubu spoke in his cheerful voice. This book holds a lot of memories, as far as Kumamoto Books is concerned, so Iman set it aside. He probably had a hunch that someday someone might come looking for it. Not even Minami had known that, and she felt her chest tighten at the thought. She scrunched her lips together to keep herself from asking him how he could possibly have been aware of that. Deeply moved, Michijuru mumbled, "Is that so? But how did you know I was searching for this book?" Masubu smiled sunnily at his puzzled expression. Puzzled question. "The books told me, of course." Michijuru's eyes opened wide, and Minami grimaced. "We've got old books on display near the first floor entrance, right? Valuable books published long ago, signed copies from authors who came to Komodo Books, that sort of stuff. When you came into the shop, Michijuru, those old books made a real commotion. That's how I knew. I could tell you had a deep connection with this store." Michijuru seemed as if he didn't entirely understand Masubu's explanation. Of course not. Minami was taken aback at the outlandish story. "But thank you for visiting our shop today. This book is also happy that it was able to see you, Michijuru. Please feel free to take a photograph with it if you'd like. You could also make a sign." When Masubu suggested that, Michijuru held out the reference book in his scarred hands and took a good look at his old friend. Looking at the book as if speaking directly to it, he answered, "I suppose, since I came all this way, I suppose I'll do that." When Masubu was done showing Michijuru how the photos and signs worked, he went back down to the first floor and expressed his gratitude to Manami, who had a sullen look on her face. Thank you very much for that. I knew from the whisperings of the other books that the one Michijuru was looking for was still in the store, but I couldn't immediately tell where it was based on their explanations. You really helped me out by showing me where to look. Thanks to you, we were able to reunite the book and Michijuru. He was so happy. Manami grumbled bluntly, Right. We didn't reunite anyone. We just gave Michijuru a book, you weirdo. Everything Masubu had said just stressed her out. He kept blabbering on with unclouded eyes, seemingly unaware of Manami's mixed feelings. I bet there's been all sorts of drama at Komodo Books over its many years. With both the purchased books and the ones that remained, I'm sure we'll work to help lots of people meet books here until the very last day. I'm looking forward to it. Masubu considered Michijuru being able to reunite with the book from his memories a real achievement. This was despite the fact that among the tomes that had rained down on Amon, a new copy of the Field Guide of Extinct Animals on the very top shelf had been the one to deliver the fatal blow. Even Manami understood that she did not need to tell Michijuru that. But could this harmless, bespectacled high schooler know other things she wasn't aware of? Surely it had been a coincidence that the book that had sealed the fate of Amon, the owner of the last bookstore in town, had been the Field Guide of Extinct Animals, right? Moreover, the painting of the bird bones that decorated the office where the sample copy had been stashed, its title was Extinction. This piece is titled Extinction. The day Manami had first conversed with the owner in that office, he'd smiled gently and told her that. It's a lovely painting, isn't it? My father made it. He was the previous owner. She had stared with calm, clear eyes at the painting of huge bird bones towering over the beach. It was beautiful and intense, but to Manami it also looked desolate and a little frightening. Who killed Amon? She was drawn back to the words Masubu had uttered. At that moment, he must have heard a response from the volumes lined up on the shelves. Assuming that books really could talk, they probably would have told him something. The truth about the boss's death? With a stiff, tight face, she mumbled, Hey, Inoki, can you really hear the voices of books? She almost asked it aloud. Yeah, what's up? Masubu asked, his tone carefree. It's nothing. Manami turned away from him. She felt her cheeks quickly growing hot, embarrassed to have almost uttered such a stupid question. There's no way books can talk, and no way he can hear them. Okay, well, that's the end of the story? Chapter something? I don't know. This next section is, it says side story, the secret name of Tomb of the Wild Chrysanthemum. So we're going to leave it there. And, yeah, that's all. I guess I'll be back next week or something. Hope you enjoyed. Farewell.